Next Shabbat is the 10th anniversary of Debbie Friedman's death on the Jewish calendar, and we will be acknowledging that and incorporating more of her music in next Friday night service to honor her memory. Next Thursday night, HUC is doing a 10th anniversary concert, and we've put out that information and look for it. We will distribute it again this week, and I know that Joyce will be playing at that concert, and many Reformed cantors from New York will be singing, and we'll honor her memory. 10 years, it's almost impossible to believe, but time has become such a bizarre concept. I don't know what's a short week, a long day, what's a month. So this Friday night, on this Friday night of the week in which Joseph Biden became the president of the United States and Kamala Harris became our vice president, we are acknowledging these 4 years. And the miracles of change that happened in the world don't happen out of thin air. They happen with this unique partnership that exists between human agency and taking action and God's presence and strength and inspiration and hope. And we have worked hard at our muscles of gratitude and our muscles of hope, and we have done so much in these 4 years. And so tonight, on this really anniversary of that inauguration, as we express gratitude for this year's inauguration, we want to pay tribute to what these 4 years a little bit have been and to acknowledge those who have done so much. In his inaugural speech, President Biden quoted, "Open our souls instead of hardening our hearts," quoting from this section of the book of Exodus in which we find ourselves. Open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. These are choices we have as human beings. We are faced with so many experiences and moments in which we have a choice whether we harden our hearts or we open our souls. And I believe this imperative that we are offered by this president's inaugural speech gives us a prism, a lens into what can happen when we manage to open our souls and not harden our hearts. The biblical text shows us what happens when Pharaoh's heart is hardened. And when he lacks any empathy, any concern, when he's unable to have a soft heart or an open soul, we see what happens in that situation. We pray that our souls will remain open, that we will continue our hard work and our joy and our prayer and our study and our love of community and each other, and welcome God's presence into our lives, both when it's hard and when it's good. We're far, far, far from being out of the wilderness. The COVID virus, as President Biden said in his press conferences yesterday and today, things are going to get worse before they get better. These are going to be very tough couple of months. But we're going to continue doing what we do best at CBST, which is to continue building this teva, this ark which carries us through difficult times, and expressing gratitude that the leadership in Washington, D.C. will be our partners in facing this crisis rather than an adversary. And for that, I, for one, am very, very grateful. Right after the election, Marcia Melnick came up to me and said to me, "Rabbi, don't you think we need to consider this synagogue becoming a sanctuary synagogue?" Harold Levine came up to me and said, Rabbi, what can I do? I haven't been an activist up till now, but what can I do in response to this? Adria Benjamin came to me and said, "Rabbi, I'm a musician. I don't know how to be engaged in a political activism, but I'm a musician. What can I do?" Sabrina Farber thought of this calls and cards. So many of you came up to me and said, "What can we do?" And together, we created so many waves of holiness. And I'm delighted to invite our Director of Social Justice Programming, who in partnership with so many of you have worked these 4 years to strengthen our ark and to lead us through these troubled waters, and to find and build holiness in every place. So I'm delighted to invite Rabbi James to offer some words and reflection.
4 years ago, looking towards a fearful future, this community committed to being a bold spiritual community of resistance and love. In the words of Rabbi Cohen's prayer for our country, we understood in our kishkas that as vulnerable as we felt, there were those at greater risk, and that it was our holy work to stand with them. In the last 4 years, this community has stood with our Muslim neighbors, our House of Peace group standing at the Islamic Center at NYU 164 weeks in a row, with hundreds of you holding signs saying, Jewish New Yorkers love our Muslim neighbors. CBST and the ICNYU have showed up for each other in the wake of tragedies and to celebrate each other's most important holidays. In the last 4 years, this community has held more than 200 meetings of resistance calls and cards and the Democracy Action Team, plus 2 Democracy Sunday events, sending more than 8,000 postcards, more than 5,000 letters and emails, more than 10,000 text messages, and making more than 3,000 phone calls to our elected representatives and to people across the country to encourage them to vote in the last 2 elections. In the last 4 years, this community has lifted up the voices of our trans and non-binary family, hosting a trans convening that brought over 200 trans and non-binary Jews from across the country together for a full weekend of prayer and music and study. And we've learned as a community from over a dozen trans and non-binary rabbis and teachers. In the last 4 years, both adult and teen members of this community have joined CBST civil rights trips to the South to better understand the most painful parts of our country's history. And we're inspired to create a new team focusing on ending mass incarceration. That team has built connections with some of the organizations doing the most important work today to take an active role in advocacy work to end mass incarceration and systemic racism. And this team has helped dozens of people start volunteering, mentoring those returning to society after incarceration, becoming pen pals with those currently incarcerated, and more. In the last 4 years, this community has marched in dozens of protests and rallies in and around New York and in Washington, D.C., and a CBST contingent got arrested at a protest supporting DACA kids and Dreamers at the Capitol. Hundreds of us have shown up to support Muslims, immigrants, workers' rights, trans lives, environmental justice, and much more. In the last 4 years, this community became a sanctuary synagogue, declaring our home a refuge for our asylum-seeking neighbors. We started an immigration clinic that has provided support for more than 200 asylum seekers from 40 countries in 7 languages, with dozens of dedicated volunteers offering a warm welcome and practical support every week. And this community has raised over $30,000 to fill the new sanctuary bond fund and help release asylum seekers from immigration detention. And in the last year, this community has moved almost all of this work online, continuing to do this necessary, holy work, even in the midst of our own increased vulnerability. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When we have finished reading a book of the Torah, we say together, Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek, be strong and we will be strengthened together. Even when we are physically apart, we strengthen each other every day. And as we come to the end of one chapter and move forward into a new part of our story, we will continue to draw strength from and give strength to everyone around us. So in that spirit, we're going to revisit some images from our regular weekly House of Peace visits to the Islamic Center at NYU, which began 4 years ago on the Friday after the inauguration, followed by a special message from Imam Khalid Latif.